The time is now 6:03. We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Just as a reminder to our commissioners, when you are speaking, please make sure to unmute your microphone to be heard on the broadcast. The public who is not registered in advance can watch the live broadcast on the city's YouTube channel. For live Spanish translation services, please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091* to get Spanish translation services.
I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Will staff please do a roll call?
Commissioner Sanchez. Present. Commissioner Van Heusen.
Present.
Commissioner Biltoff.
Present.
Commissioner Hoskins.
Present.
Commissioner Nelson.
Present.
And we have two commissioners with us tonight that are absent, Commissioner Elginston and Commissioner Schechter. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Would everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Can I please have a motion to approve the September 3rd meeting minutes?
I motion to approve the September 3rd meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Hoskin and a second by Commissioner Sanchez. May you please open electronic voting? The motion passes, 5 yeses, 0 noes, 0 abstain. Let's see. Can I have a motion to approve the October 1st meeting minutes?
So moved. I will second.
We have a first and a second. Can we please open electronic voting? The motion passes, 5 yeses, 0 noes, 0 abstain. Some nice hardy paper. I'd like to announce, let's see, the first case, Z24-0003, Thompson Thrift Multifamily. I will open the public hearing for this case and ask Planner Nation Chavez to announce this case.
Thompson Thrift Development Incorporated is requesting approval of a zone change from the AG Agricultural District to the R3 Multifamily Residential District. The approximately 12.7 acre subject property is generally located at 10225 Chambers Road.
At this time, I'll ask the applicant to come forward to address the commission with a staff presentation to follow. And if I could ask the commissioners to hold questions until the end of the presentations, that would be welcome. Thank you.
Terrific. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Marcus Pochner. Somebody is probably starting the presentation here. I'm a land use and community outreach consultant. I'm honored to be here tonight to present to you. I'll walk through our slides. I will say that we have kind of a full deck. I promise I will be very dutifully working through the slides.
Yes. Mr. Pochner, I might have missed it. Could you please state your address for the record?
Absolutely. Pochner is P-A-C-H-N-E-R, and my address is 1480 Humboldt Street, Denver, Colorado, 80218.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for putting the presentation forward. Again, here on behalf of Thompson Thrift, and honored to present to all of you. This is a rough outline of what we'll cover tonight, a little background on the site, talk about our zoning request from the Agricultural Zone District to R3, really go through the two comprehensive plans. I know that you all have a new comprehensive plan that was effective late last week, November 1st, talk about our community outreach, and then our traffic solutions and what we heard from the neighbors and how we have incorporated some of those changes into our development plan. On behalf of the whole team, I'll give our presentations. We do have many members here to answer any questions you may have. Thompson Thrift is the developer on this site. Our company, Community Outreach, Ripley Design is the planning and architectural, Proof Civil, and Fox Tuttle for our traffic and engineering on the site. Thompson Thrift, just a brief overview, almost a 40-year-old company now, very experienced, high development, high design company, full service residential. As you look at that residential now, based in 5 different offices, one here in Colorado. As you see here now, we have actually done just over 20 projects now in the Colorado area, in all of this area, and honored to be looking and hopeful to be great neighbors here in Commerce City as well. This is just an example of a little bit of the amenity zone, the interior outdoor, trying to pull the sites together, really showing some examples of the residential quality that we build across the states. A little background on this site, just to be clear about this before staff goes through it. This is that site right as it transitions just north of 102nd at Chambers. That is Sable on the west side of the site, all the way up to the utility corridor. Of course, very important noticing the commercial node, the King Soopers, the grocery at 104th, and how this really supports it. We also believe this is a very important site that transitions from the Harvest Meadows neighborhood to the south. This is a little bit of our story that we went through. We did submit under the previous comp plan, the 2010 comp plan, and now here adopted in 2020, or the 2045 plan. We'll talk about both of those and really how we find compliance, full compliance with both of the guidance documents. As you all well understand, we are in the zoning here. We will give you a glimpse of the development plan, and we have shared that with the neighborhood as well, so they had an idea of how the site actually lives. That's a concurrent process with the development plan and final plat, but obviously dependent upon the support for the rezoning application that is before you today. We always look at 2 hallmarks for our developments. The first thing is community outreach, and then what do the guidance that we have and underlying plans. So first on community outreach, we use a concentric outreach philosophy where we work with the most impacted neighbors first. We always focus on them. They live adjacent to it. They know the site. They know how we can make improvements. So that is Harvest Meadows immediately to the south of us. Those core businesses around us, right at 104th, that area there, really working with all of them. We then went from there, met with the school, other areas there, and also all the way out to the chamber and thinking about economic development. To be clear, what we heard are probably consistent things that you would expect to hear, but these were issues that we kind of heard from people. Address the landscaping buffers, talk to us about appropriate density, traffic, what are the solutions here? The opportunity that we had, and one thing I would say about your neighborhood meeting process, staff was so involved in that, and we really appreciate that. Public Works was there, planning was there. I think we were able to answer a lot of neighborhood questions. We talked a lot that in the zoning document, we deal with the density, those economic benefits, what comes into the site, the uses, and then really how the development plan, how we're addressing any concerns they have about buffers, traffic, access, and the amenities. Our request is a rezoning application. We are basing again on the 2 comprehensive plans. We did a full submittal of our compliance, and I know staff did as well. We believe we are in full compliance with both plans, all the guiding. But just as a snapshot, this is the existing zoning. It's an agricultural district. As you see there, our site outlined in red just above the neighborhood and before the utility corridor. There's an agricultural site beside us as well. We are rezoning or requesting to rezone to R3. The 2010 comprehensive plan, again, looking at all these check marks, all of these goals that we comply with, the Northern Range neighborhood, the mix of uses, a mix of housing typology, a connected street network. We are bringing in very important transportation network to this area, and a walkability focus, the way we bring walkability to this site. As you look at that map, our proposed zoning here for R3, The consistency that you see in that 2010 comp plan, this was for residential high. Any neighborhood that has been here has seen this as residential high. This is that transition to the commercial corridor and why we are applying for that, to make that buffer and also reinforce that great commercial corridor just to the north of us. Again, in your new code, same consistency with the northern neighborhoods, looking at our site now kind of almost embedded in the northern neighborhoods, finding a lot of the same support for a mix of housing products, looking at that same typology and really strengthening the retail components around us. Again, many of those goals showing up, the diversity of product, the economic strength, and transportation mobility goals across the board. Seeing us expand the transit services, the pedestrian services, and all of that parks and open space, the edges of our site, really starting to create a community fabric along the edges of our site. We did look at the economic impact as well. Again, strengthening the economic core there of that commercial node, we think is very important, allowing there to be good, strong retail and having good rooftops there to support it. These are specific things that we want to address. Again, sorry, I'm going through this very quickly. We'll come back for any questions. But on the traffic pattern, I think you all know this. This shows a little bit of some of the just disjointed or disconnected, right? It's emerging infrastructure a lot in this area. You see the yellow that is there today. That's the existing infrastructure. You see just south of us, there's kind of a stub, half of 102nd Avenue there that does not connect to Chambers. So that neighborhood to the south is access south of our site into the middle of the neighborhood and then spreads out to different streets in the neighborhood. We wanted to be sure that we were showing the very important improvements that need to happen on the site. So there are no sidewalks on the west side of Chamber. You can all picture this. This is the images on your left show that west side looking north and south. There is no infrastructure. There's no pedestrian fabric. So really bringing that up all the way as it heads to 104th. So we will be putting a sidewalk connection. This shows how we engage with additional landscaping, an 8-foot multimodal trail, an additional 30 feet of right-of-way. That's how we get that space to do that. We're also putting a crosswalk, as you see at the bottom of the screen there, at 102nd to actually have safe passage to really engage that 8-foot trail. And then also a dedicated right-hand turn, which is westbound turn on Chambers, so we have safe access into this neighborhood that we're creating into the existing neighborhood that is south of us as well. On 102nd, then looking at that, this is a very interesting street. I called it a stub of a street today. You see the two images today. The one on the bottom left is from Sable, right, looking east. And then the other is interior to the network or to the neighborhood today. It just ends, right? It's at 102nd. There's about half of that street that's there today. So we will be providing, really, you see this view right here is where you're seeing that. And then this street today is where that ends today. We will be creating an entire and thorough 102nd Avenue, making this very important connection for our site, for the neighborhood, and all of the area around us. This is in full compliance with the Transportation Master Plan. You see there in blue the minor residential collectors. We are effectively creating on our site, south of our site, 102nd Avenue, creating that access to take away traffic so it doesn't have to go through the existing neighborhood, that it almost segments our traffic and allows a true east-west connection over to Sable. So again, providing that very needed infrastructure for the community and helping provide that and keep our traffic out of the neighborhood. You get a little glimpse of the site plan here that we're proposing, or the development plan, but you see how important that is. You see a little bit of the southern part of that street that exists today, where we will build out an entire 102nd Avenue, make those connections. We were very thoughtful about having our primary access here not line up with one of the streets south of us. So this really is an access point to our community, so that doesn't flow into the neighborhood. And then one connection here on the west side of our site at Altura. Again, that may be neighbors that come here and maybe live in this area that come on 102nd and access there today instead of driving and winding all the way through the neighborhood. So again, we think a neighborhood benefiting street, and you see that connection that is so important there on 102nd. This gives you that view. We must put in the temporary interim connection all the way over to Sable. So you can see that infrastructure, that grid emerging there on 102nd. Our site, how important that is a buffer. You see the land use buffer transitioning to the retail and also to the single family, but really start to see the transportation system and the pedestrian system emerge. Just showing again that pedestrian system. It shows the blue today is that existing network, but on both sides of 102nd, now in yellow, there will be sidewalks, pedestrian connections on both sides of that. We think that's so beneficial to the neighborhood and our site, and then of course along Chambers as you head north. You also see the future pedestrian connections going across 102nd as it moves west to Stable. So again, really stitching together that neighborhood fabric to really absorb that and provide different pedestrian alternatives for the neighborhood. This does show, we get this question, the neighbors are very fair to ask that. This is a glimpse of our development plan. As you all know, we're just have our rezoning here tonight. But just wanted to show you that we are meeting all requirements for parking. You see the requirements in code there, the number of spaces. We have 548 spaces. We are doing that in a mix of stalls, garages, carports. We are using those garages in many ways to really buffer and provide a landscaping edge on the southern part of our site. So we really transition away from the neighborhoods. We do not have buildings up against the existing homes to really provide that setback and that buffer from those existing homes. Just to show again, we really heard a lot from the neighbors about these specific things. They wanted us to focus on 102nd. So this is just some more narrative about why we think those improvements are so good for the neighborhood and for our site, and really honoring the requirements of the master plan. This is that development plan submittal, just wrapping up here to show you a little bit of that building. We're proposing 283 units. Engaging Chambers, you see a building that is along there, that amenity zone, the sidewalk, and then that core clubhouse leasing center. We will not have an access directly off to Chambers into our site, rather onto 102nd, which is appropriate, so we don't have people turning in and out. We have a roadway and a dedicated turn lane. We think that is so important. Transportation was right to suggest that, to really pull our traffic in. And most importantly, these neighbors here asked us to create effectively a sidewalk behind their homes today. They do not have a sidewalk. There are not trees there today. So we're adding that in and creating a proper backyard, if you will, along that edge as it transitions to 102nd Avenue. Again, just briefly, plant palette, very native plants, kind of xeric, really honoring the tradition of this land, really this emerging landscape. This shows a little bit of that amenity zone, the clubhouse, the leasing, the fitness. You see the amenities, the indoor, outdoor on our site, just giving a glimpse of that. Very high design, very much trying to provide a diversity of product and really attracting new people to the market. This is some of that conceptual imagery, again, of that indoor, outdoor, and the plant typology, the really design, the palette of the materials that we'll use on this site. A couple more images of that. I'm sure our architects and planners could probably do much more justice to that, but we wanted to show, we actually shared these with the neighborhoods and got a lot of comments about really liking the design and the renderings of the architecture, the plant, kind of more of a prairie palette, the colors that are there, trying to break up any facade, balconies, really engaging the landscape here as well, and then seeing really a different color pattern, and the leasing center and clubhouse, a little lower scale, really much more open, showing that. I will note that on our open space that is required, we are required to do 15% open space on this site. We are doing 26% open space on this, and really using that edge around our site to provide that proper buffer from the existing neighborhood. Again, we've also found additional plantings. We're really doubling the plantings to be sure that we have a properly landscaped site for the existing neighborhood. Lastly, I'll just show this. This is just a full analysis of your zoning, your garages, your parking lots, and landscaping. We are not asking for a single exception. We are meeting or exceeding every requirement. We believe the neighborhood deserves that. We think this is a site that really is well articulated and fits into the neighborhood vision and the comprehensive plan from 2010 and 2045. As you can see here, we've tried to reflect what we heard from the neighbors. We've incorporated those design solutions in both the zoning and the development plan, but we're happy to walk through any of those questions or comments that you see on that. With that, I will show that we believe we are in full compliance with your approval criteria. Staff wrote a terrific staff report that went through all of those. We believe we do meet each of your requirements and would respectfully request that we be allowed to move forward to City Council and continue to work with the city, with the neighbors. If there are neighbors that we hear from, we will continue to engage with them as we move through this process. With that, and I'm sorry again for going so quickly through that, I am happy to answer any questions, and we'd respectfully request your support for the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pochner. We'll hold questions until the end because Mr. Chavez may cover those points in his presentation.
Perfect, thank
So
you.
thank you for your time.
Good evening, Planning Commission. So just a quick refresh of what is proposed tonight. A zone change is the official changing of a zoning district for a property. Zoning determines land use and bulk standards, such as setbacks and building height, with the development details occurring through a development plan at a later date, or in this instance concurrently. Tonight, Planning Commission is deciding whether the proposed zoning and associated rules meet the LDC or Land Development Code approval criteria, and what type of recommendation to City Council should occur. Andrew, could you? So as the applicant stated, the property is located at 10225 Chambers Road along the western edge of Chambers Road, and it is just north of the Harvest Meadows subdivision. The proposed zoning is R3 for the multifamily residential zoning district, and the applicant's intent is to develop the site as an apartment complex with 9 apartment buildings and 283 total units. As stated earlier, there's a concurrent development plan and final plat for the site currently under review by staff, and then the site plan as well as the elevations are included in your packet for your reference. So the subject property is within the Northern Neighborhoods Character Area, in which multifamily residential is listed as a secondary land use near collectors and arterials, meaning that they are less prevalent and serve to support the primary land use, which in this instance is single-family residential. And so while the 2010 comprehensive plan is no longer in effect, it is worth noting that the application was submitted under this plan and all of the review occurred under its purview. And within the 2010 comprehensive plan, future land use plan, the site is designated as residential high. So this is an aerial taken on August 20th of this year. The property outlined in red is mostly vacant, save a ranch home and accessory structures. And to the north are transmission lines, as well as a fairly large oil and gas pipeline. These are two photos taken of the site from October 3rd. The one on the top is facing north from East 102nd Avenue, and the photo on the bottom is from Chambers Road facing west into the site. A neighborhood meeting occurred on July 10th of this year. 8 residents attended, in which questions and concerns included lack of commercial uses in the area, increased traffic, proposed connectivity to Harvest Meadows, and a lack of amenities in the area. So as of today, staff has received 2 written letters regarding the proposal, and both those letters have been provided to you all this evening. They should be in front of you on your dais. And staff has noted the proposed zone change has been reviewed by all relevant development review team agencies, such as planning, engineering, the 27J School District, the Water District, and Public Works. And staff has found that the application meets the approval criteria for a zone change, specifically that the zone change is consistent with the comprehensive plan, there's adequate public services, there is a greater need for diversity in housing in the Northern Range, and additional population to attract commercial and retail users is proposed. A full analysis of the approval criteria may be found within your staff report, and staff is able to discuss each criteria as requested. And lastly, staff has noted the following items for consideration by this body. The zone change allows the site to develop as a multifamily apartment complex in which it is complementary with the comprehensive plan and surrounding uses. It will result in a greater population, which is attractive to commercial and retail users, and the resulting increased density of housing will simultaneously increase population while maintaining available land for commercial development. In addition, development of the property will assist in creation of roadway connections between Chambers Road and Sable Boulevard, as well as greater overall connectivity for vehicular users and pedestrians in this area. The proposed development will act as a transition from commercial and transmission lines to the north to the single-family residence to the south, And lastly, the proposed development will result in a greater mix of uses in the northern range. Thank you for your time, and at this time, staff is available to answer any questions you all may have.
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? Commissioner Van Huzen.
Thank you. I looked at the preliminary traffic report. That is extremely long. It's extremely detailed, and I'm going to have to tell you, it was very hard for me to understand. I also read the neighborhood meeting results, and there seemed to be a lot of things that I was looking for in the traffic report, and I had a hard time finding them. Can you tell me how many pages that traffic report is?
We do have the applicant's traffic engineer here this evening, so if you'd like them to give you a synopsis of the traffic,
I'd
they
really
are
appreciate
available.
that, because like I said, I had a very hard time going through it. It was very, very extensive, and I think that's a good thing, but at the same time, it was hard for me to try and look at that traffic report, find the information I was looking for regarding the resident concerns. So if the traffic engineer is aware of the concerns that the residents had, are you aware of those specific concerns? Maybe you could address a couple of them for me.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so my name is Scott Kilgore. I'm with the Fox Tuttle Transportation Group, the traffic engineer on this project. Totally appreciate your comment about the length of the report. I know those documents do get long and they're hard to understand. Those are developed in accordance with the engineering specifications of the city. So we have to hit a lot of technical things that kind of results in a document that's hard to understand from the public. But in your comment about the questions that came up at the public neighborhood meeting, I was present to speak through traffic questions there. And so if there were specific comments that you had or...
Yeah, let me just reference one of the letters that we got. This one, one of the residents was concerned that you would be accessing through their subdivision. And I was trying to find where accessing this development would actually come through the adjacent subdivision. Does it?
No, so the access for this project has been designed specifically to be off of 102nd Avenue. And the connection that this project will be building from 102nd Avenue to Chambers will be the primary connection. So Chambers is the main arterial street in this area. And then 102nd Avenue is built as a collector street. So that's kind of one tier down. And the direct access from this project will all be off of 102nd Avenue. That helps with safety and the operations on Chambers. So that keeps that kind of moving, sort of the through traffic, and then all of the traffic coming off of Chambers will take 102nd and then go directly to this development.
So Harvest Meadows would be adjacent to 102nd. You would not be, I'm trying to, that's what I was trying to figure out from this traffic report. It does not go through that subdivision at all, just adjacent to it.
Yes, it's adjacent, and it actually does improve access for Harvest Meadows to get to Chambers, because it provides another access point to get out to Chambers that they don't have today. But the design of this project specifically has been to pull all of the traffic off of 102nd Avenue specifically, not through the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez? And actually, one moment before, just in a matter of time. So just to follow up on that, just something that I noticed on page 27, to follow up on Commissioner Van Huzen's point, is that there was language stated that it assumed that the improvements in Anderson Ranch along 100th were to meet the loads of the 2044 plan. So, correct me if I'm wrong, that's taking into account traveling through I just want to make sure that your statement is accurate as to what that statement, if you could clarify what that statement meant in the overall course of the traffic study.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be happy to clarify that. So the mention of Anderson Ranch was based on a comment. So through this process, the study was submitted to the city once. We received comments and then edited and submitted back. One of the comments from the city was to make sure that we were including the intersection of 100th Avenue and Chambers Road because Anderson Ranch, the adjacent development, it's kind of south of this area. That project is going to be improving the intersection of 100th Avenue and Chambers. So the comment from the city was to make sure that the improvements that were being built through the adjacent development through Anderson Ranch, that those improvements would be appropriate even with this project added. So when we revised our traffic study, we went through and added in that intersection at 100th Avenue. And so in our future, we're including all of the additional traffic that Anderson Ranch is expected to generate. And then on top of that, we put our traffic on top of that to make sure that there's no additional improvements needed at 100th Avenue. So
Thank you for the clarification, because
Yeah.
it's a bit confusing, and I think that helps to further the point that you're trying to make. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
absolutely.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Thank you. I just want to address the neighborhood meeting. There was a slide deck in there, and I believe Mr. Chavez indicated that there were 8 people present. The report, your slide deck said 7, and there were 6 on the sign-up sheet. I'm not trying to clarify the number. I mean, we're talking,
Sure.
well, we're talking maybe 4% more or less. So my question to you is, also in that slide deck on page 18, you talked about several types of meetings. Is that the only meeting that's been held so far? And just to, additionally, does that, since you have so many projects and you've done this several times, does that 4.5% represent what usually happens in this type of thing? Or are we going to engage and have more meetings?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. I think what we showed there, we probably had up to 10 people in that room. Not everybody always signs up, right, for the application. There were a number of couples that were there as well. So it was somewhere in that range. We had a very engaged, we had 2 or 3 staff people. So we talked about planning, transportation, and all of those. We did have a sign-in sheet. We've followed up with people from that. Specifically, there was a gentleman who lives on one of the north-south houses, those 5 houses there that would be on the south side of 102nd. And he wanted us to go look. So we actually went as a team, looked, walked that area, and made specific improvements with Commerce City to actually add that sidewalk on the northern part of their backyard, right, to really make that, and actually found enough right away there to put in trees as well. So that's an example. We followed up with any other neighbors that we've had. So we did not have another formal meeting, right, but we then we actually walked the neighborhoods, which we traditionally do. Our firm does that on the outreach. We looked a little bit at that connection on the pedestrians, just talked about, some of the retail that's there, actually some of the developers that are looking at those sites and the pads there, and just that. So we followed up with that. Again, that list of types of meetings is something we said, if you want this, we'd love to come meet with you, have coffee with you. So we offered that to all the neighbors there. And if they would like to do that, we'll continue to do that with them.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Sanchez, any other questions? And then I have a few questions, just I'm not sure if this is best directed to city staff or to the applicant. And it was just in the information that it was provided to us, that there was a site plan, but it didn't provide dimensional information. And as we're looking at rezoning, so the question was just to confirm bulk standards, because you went through it very briefly. So I was curious as to what the frontage of the building is. Does it have 2 frontages? And where my question is going, is this a corner lot or does it have 2 frontages?
So proposed, there's 2 lots proposed. Generally, where my cursor is where the lot split occurs. And so the eastern property is considered a corner lot, and then the western portion of the site is considered an interior lot with the frontage facing along East 102nd Avenue.
So what would be considered the side yard?
The side yard for the western lot would be,
For the eastern lot.
the
My
east-
question is just about the setback at the corner. Just if you could elaborate on the setbacks relative to that. Because if it's two frontages, then it's 20 feet. But if there's a side yard setback, then it's 30 feet, just to make sure that we're compliant with what the bulk standards are noting.
yes. Staff does not entirely remember which is which. However, we've gone through 3 rounds of review, and that detail has been hammered out, and they meet those standards. And certainly, they need to resubmit 1 or 2 more times as well, and staff can relook at it. However, I know we've had 1 or 2 meetings with the applicants to talk specifically about what the setbacks are and what is considered front yard and the side on street setback. So that has been discussed at length, and if I recall correctly, they currently meet those standards.
Thank you. It was hard to discern on the documents that were included in the package to us, so I'm just asking the question. My next question was just relative to the statement of open space. So it's been noted as 26%. How much of that is the detention pond? And I know that the detention pond can count towards open space. I just know that that has been a very contentious issue within the city. So just for the matter of transparency for this hearing.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Abdul Barzak with Ripley Design, the land planner and landscape architect on the project. I can go back and get the exact percentage, but I think it's somewhere around 4%, that entire kind of northern area there. But yeah, I think everything outside of that detention pond still meets the minimum standards.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that, just for, like I said, that's been noted in other cases that has been a concern where items are portrayed in one way, and it meets the letter of the Land Development Code and what the standards are, but the perception is something else. So just that's very clear.
And we'll make sure that we get that exact number to city staff as well to pass along.
Thank you very much. And that's all of the questions that I have. Thank you very much. Do any members of the public wish to provide comments to this case? Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Marissa Mink, and I live in Harvest Meadows for 16 and a half years. Some things I learned tonight that I didn't know. I don't know if you can put the picture back up, the one that said aerial on it. If you can, great. If not, that's fine. I just wanted to say a few things. I am not naive to the fact that our close-knit neighborhood of 150 homes and 5 blocks would, one day be surrounded by development. That was inevitable, and we knew that. We knew the woman that owned the property. She's a very special person to us in the neighborhood, so we knew eventually something would go in there. What I'm upset about is that having exits through the neighborhood, which is true, will create a thoroughfare through 2 out of our 5 streets in the neighborhood, one of which is mine, Altura Street. Yes, to have an exit on 102nd, but in the meantime, before Anderson Development, which we had a meeting with them probably 3 years ago, and this, I was told, is a year-out build from when it gets approved, is that people are it's gonna cause a thoroughfare on our street to higher traffic, kids not being able to play, porch pirates, decrease in property values, and having the adjacent property, even with a fence or a sidewalk or trees, is right. There's not even a buffer, and I was told they can't move the neighborhood back because of the electrical towers. That's why they can't have that neighborhood exit by the Dunkin' Donuts on Altura Street and connect it. And I get it if it's 102nd, but if you don't put a traffic light at 102nd in Chambers and just have an entrance or exit there, it's gonna be like the other intersections, like East 100 and 104th and Chambers, that have accidents almost weekly without a traffic light there. I understand some of these things are not preventable, and I feel sometimes these meetings are obligatory. that things are just going to happen despite, and I wish more people in my community would be here tonight, and I wish more people would have come to that meeting. But it's just greatly affecting, you know, to have roads. If I didn't want to go 102nd to cut around, I would cut through my street and go to East 100 to exit there. So the fact that they're saying it's not going to affect traffic coming through the neighborhood, that people are all going to exit on 102nd, that is not true. You know, it seems kind of not reckless, but think of the constituents in their community who already have to deal with my neighborhood, not only the Thompson development, the Anderson development coming behind us, and now, you know, the effect it has on the community as a whole with more housing, one supermarket. We don't want
Excuse
to
me,
move, but that's my point.
Yes, thank you very much for your impassioned statement. We appreciate your comment. Thank you. Is there anyone else attending who would like to make comment? Is there anyone attending virtually tonight who wishes to speak?
No one registered beforehand, and no one has raised their hand to speak.
Does the applicant wish to respond to any of these, or to the concerns addressed by the resident?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to the neighbor for bringing that up. I think we just want to try to reinforce that we do not want to desire, don't want to drive any traffic through the neighborhood. This is a minor or collector road. We actually think the efficacy, the build out of 102nd actually keeps that out of the neighborhood. She knows her neighborhood very, very well. As you can see just the bottom of the screen here, there's only one access point out through that to Chambers. So you have to almost kind of wind through the neighborhood or go down to 100. So again, we believe the direct access to Chambers is how our folks will go. And then future, if you're headed to the west and north, you'd go to Sable and up, right? So there's other ways. So again, we believe this is actually a responsible site plan. Transportation has been great. This does follow your master transportation plan to really try to segment, if you will, that traffic. We do think what was most important we heard from the neighbors was pedestrian connectivity on both sides of 102nd, and we've included that. So
Thank you.
thank you. Yes.
At this time, I will now close the public hearing for this case. Yes, sorry. I did not see your hand raised.
That's okay. I want to thank Ms. Mink, and I understand how difficult it is sometimes to get your neighbors to actually stand up for themselves. So I do understand that. I understand her concerns about a quiet street now potentially becoming something more than a quiet street and a thoroughfare. And I would like to ask the city.
Commissioner Van Heusen, if you could hold your comments for just a moment more, as it's, unless you're going to ask a question. Because are you going to ask a question? Thank you.
I'm getting to it. I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm a little verbose.
No worries.
I'd like to ask the city if there are any ways that that area could have a study done for its safety as far as traffic signals, et cetera? Because that was one of the things that the resident had brought up.
Lee Alverson with Community Development. There is a way. One of the comments that we have made with the future application that's not being heard tonight is discussing a traffic signal at 102nd Avenue. It would not likely be built with this development because it wouldn't meet federal warrants, but it would be more a portion of payment as a cash in lieu as a part of the development agreement.
Thank you very much. All right. Let's see. At this time, I will now close the public hearing for this case. Is there any discussion from the commission? I just have one additional point that I'd like to make that I think would help, especially in instances of this, is for city staff to relate about the transportation master plan, about the connected road networks, is that people don't like change, and and people are passionate about their neighborhood. Like, that's, I believe, why we're all sitting up here at the dais. The people, the resident is here voicing their concern. So I think if people knew as to why the city is asking these things of developers. Developers aren't doing this on their own volition. They're trying to fit within the framework that the city has laid out for the development of the city. I think that would help, as if there were open houses related to that, or whatever that may be. So not, if that was with this case or with future cases, I think that would help.
Yes, sir. We can certainly work on that. And with new management and planning, we are reworking our staff reports and our presentations, and staff certainly hopes to make things better, and we're adding more detail with each new presentation. So we're certainly looking into that. In each new case, we're learning what works better for elected and appointed officials.
Thank you. Any other additional comments? Seeing none, can we have a motion on this case?
I move that the Planning Commission are finding that the requested multifamily residential district R3 zoning for the property located at 1225 Chambers Road containing case Z24003 meets the criteria of the Land Development Code, and based upon such finding, recommended that the City Council approve the PUD zoning.
I will second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Hoskin and a second by Commissioner Van Huzen. Is there any additional discussion on this motion? Seeing none, please open electronic voting for the case. The motion passes, 5 yeses, 0 nos, and 0 abstains. I'd like to congratulate the applicant and the applicant team on the success of your case. The next case is TXT 24-0002, short-term rental text amendment. I will open the public hearing for the next case and ask the planning manager, Heather Vidlock, to please announce the case.
Thank you, Chair. We do have Jeff Brazel, our Community Development Director, here this evening to present the short-term rental code amendment to the Land Development Code.
Good evening, Chair and Commission. Jeff Brazel, Community Development Director. I'm presenting a proposed change to the Land Development Code regarding short-term rentals tonight. This is a bit of a cleanup item from work done earlier this year at the direction of City Council. And I'm going to provide the Commission with just a lot of background of how we got to where we are today, and then where we want to go with the Land Development Code, and then answer your questions and take your comments into account as we formulate a recommendation to City Council on whether to adopt this or not. So my presentation, I'll go over the background of what short-term rentals are, how we got to where we're at today with the city wanting to move forward with short-term rentals. Going to go over the proposed regulations that we've drafted and that are included in your staff report, and then answer any questions that the Commission might have before you deliberate and make your decision. So regarding background, well, what is a short-term rental? So we kind of want to delineate this against what most people are familiar with, which is long-term rentals. So long-term rentals in apartments or homes are generally where people, need a place to live, and they rent out a home or an apartment unit for a longer period of time, usually under contract. And it's consistent with, residential living in any other neighborhood as if they were the owner of that property. So long-term rentals are, associated with year-round occupancy of dwelling units within the community, and they have leases associated with those, and those leases are typically more than 30 days, so like six-month leases, year leases, sometimes multi-year leases. To kind of contrast that, a short-term rental is the rental of a dwelling unit for shorter than 30 days. And it's usually for guests or people traveling on vacations or work, where they just need temporary accommodations for a short period of time. And it's usually done in lieu of more traditional lodging options like hotels and motels. People typically understand short-term rentals as things that they can book through Airbnb or VRBO. Our current land development code allows various lodging establishments. So a short-term rental is kind of a variation of a lodging establishment use. So our current code allows hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, and overnight campgrounds as potential lodging accommodations in various zone districts throughout the community. So bed and breakfasts are allowed in the R1, R2, R3, and R4 by right, or by permit, by permit, and then in the C1 and agricultural by right. Lodging establishments are allowed by right in the C3, mixed-use zone districts and light industrial zone districts, and allowed by permit in the C2 zone district. And then overnight campgrounds are permitted in agricultural and public zone districts. And so our current land development code doesn't contemplate short-term rentals. The only types of lodging accommodations we allow are within these more traditional types of uses. I will note that a bed and breakfast is kind of like a short-term rental. It is a lodging establishment that is usually operated within a dwelling unit, but it occurs where you can have multiple guests. It's more like a hotel. You have multiple guests and you provide services to those guests. So usually breakfast or other types of meals in exchange for lodging accommodations. So it's not exactly a short-term rental, and we'll again draw that contrast as we go through this regulation. So short-term rentals are a thing. They've been a thing for some time within the state and the country and the region. And this is an instance where innovation has outpaced land use regulations. So a lot of communities have been talking about, do we want to allow short-term rentals in our community? And how do we want to, if we do, how do we want to regulate those short-term rentals? These are conversations that have been occurring over the past five plus years in other municipalities in the Denver area. We're just getting caught up with that. These things are happening within our community. They're not permitted at this time, so they're happening in an unregulated manner. And so back in March of this past year, City Council had a presentation on there where they wanted to explore allowing short-term rentals in the community. And from that March 2024 discussion, city staff went about and proposed licensing regulations to allow short-term rentals within the community. Licensing is kind of like a permit for a use. Licensing, when it's issued, it just basically has rules associated with how you obtain a license and the rules around operations of that particular use. It's usually a complement to things that are in the land development code, which talks about how the property can be developed, used, and regulated from a development standpoint. So the city advanced these licensing regulations, and they were adopted on August 5th, but we were missing the land development code part of it. So even though we have a license, we have licensing regulations in place now, we don't have the supporting authorization in the land development code that would actually allow them to manifest themselves on private property within the community. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there with how the city approached this regulation. Ideally, these things are done in tandem because they inform the licensing and the zoning regulations inform each other. But in this instance, the licensing kind of got out ahead before it was acknowledged that, hey, we need zoning regulations as well to implement that. So that's where we're tonight. Just at a very high level, this is the framework of the licensing requirements. They are effective beginning January 1st of next year. A license is issued for a period of 1 year. There are reporting requirements upon renewal, so they have to provide records about how many people are actually staying within the short-term rental. There has to be what's called a responsible agent who lives within 30 miles and is able to respond to issues as they arise within 24 hours, or available 24 hours a day. They have to be able to respond to these issues in a very timely manner. They have to have insurance, so they have to, so guests that are residing in the short-term rental are protected from accidents that happen, and then the owners are also protected from accidents that might happen to guests within that. There's a notification requirement, so if somebody wants to pull a license for a short-term rental, they have to notify their adjacent neighbors and then provide contact information of both the property owner and the responsible agent. This is where the licensing started to get into zoning areas. There's a 500-foot separation requirement. This is in there because I think council was concerned about the over concentration of short-term rentals around each other. And I'll talk about that a little bit within context of zoning because we're taking a slightly different approach to this in the zoning code. The licensing says it's not permitted in the R3 zone district. The reason that that's in there is because City Council did not want short-term rentals to occur in multifamily units. The units have to verify that they have functioning smoke, carbon monoxide, and fire extinguishers on site, in addition to other habitability requirements in the building code. The city has the ability to inspect these short-term rentals. There are revocation procedures identified in the licensing regulations, and then there's also the requirement of a good neighbor guide that they have to provide all guests that stay within that, and that kind of guide will discuss rules of the neighborhood, any quiet hours that are required, any HOA rules that might be in effect, and some other just information about the community to help those guests that are staying within there. So we're playing a little bit of catch up here, and so we drafted proposed regulations in the Land Development Code. And again, what this would do is it would actually enable the use to occur rather than just license the use. And I'm going to go through the regulations in a little bit of detail, but the regulations generally do three things. One, they provide an updated definition of short-term rentals, and I'll explain why that's important when we get to that definition. They establish rules for what zone districts short-term rentals can operate within, and then they provide operational standards around short-term rentals within the zoning district or within the zoning codes. So the first one, and these are all within, if you want to look at Exhibit B, the Exhibit B is the red line version of what we're proposing here. And I'm kind of going a little bit out of order. The ordinance is drafted in order of sections, but when I talk about this, it makes sense to start at the very beginning, which, how do we define what a short-term rental is? We are proposing to slightly update this definition from the licensing version. And this is the proposed definition on the screen. So provision of lodging services within a single-family attached or detached dwelling unit. Single-family attached, the items, the letters in bold are defined terms in the code. Single-family attached is a duplex. For compensation to a person or persons for periods of less than 30 days, but it excludes bed and breakfasts and other lodging uses like hotels and motels, because those are different types of land uses. And short-term rentals can't become event centers. So you can't have a short-term rental for the purpose of hosting weddings, parties, banquets, and so forth. It's a lodging operation. It's for people to reside and get lodging on a short-term basis. It's not for events. It's not for parties. It's not for other commercial activities. It's strictly for guest services. The licensing licensing definition kind of took a different approach. It said short-term rentals are 30-day lodgings, but they can occur in not only single-family dwellings, but apartments and condos and commercial areas. It kind of defeated the purpose of what council was trying to accomplish, was making this a very focused land use that only occurs in single-family, attached and detached, which is why we're updating the definition. There are a series of supplemental standards. A lot of these are taken from the licensing, and again, the licensing regulations will be updated to kind of make sure that these two things drive together. The things that are taken from the licensing regulations are things that are more commonly found in the zoning code. And so that's what we're doing, is we're bringing operational aspects of this into the zoning code. The big one is that this is only permitted as an accessory use to a single-family attached and detached dwelling unit. Zoning regulates use of property with this scheme called primary use and accessory use. Primary use is the dominant use established on a piece of property. And accessory uses are usually functions or features or other like smaller uses that are commonly associated with a primary use, but they are subordinate to that primary use. So like an example of this would be, an apartment complex. Apartment complexes are multifamily dwelling units. Don't know what that whistle was. It does. Oh, okay. Multifamily dwelling units, but they also have like gyms and swimming pools and other recreation or other amenities on site. Those are considered accessory uses to the multifamily use because they're common and customary with a multifamily development. And so what this is saying is that a short-term rental is only allowed as an accessory use to a residential household living in a single-family detached and attached dwelling unit. So the short-term rental has to be subordinate to somebody living in the house as a residence. And that's important because short-term rentals are quasi-commercial land uses within residential neighborhoods. And one of the key things that we're trying to do is still protect the integrity of those residential neighborhoods, which are mainly for families and individuals living on a full-time basis within these neighborhoods. You don't have, you have very limited commercial activity occurring in that. So it was important that we define this as an accessory use. And when you look at the rest of the regulations, it's to reinforce this accessory use aspect of short-term rentals. So there is a license required. We're cross-referencing that, so anybody that looks at the zoning code knows to go look at the licensing regulations. There's a maximum length of stay per any one guest or contract, so no more than 30 consecutive days. There's the density restrictions, so this is where the 500 feet separation between any other licensed short-term rental property, and we measure that per an established rule of measurement that's already in the code. Some areas of the community allow accessory dwelling units right now. That is something that will be changing in the future with the new land development code and state law. State law is going to require us to allow accessory dwelling units throughout the community. And so we're getting ahead of that a little bit. So on properties that have both a main home and an accessory dwelling unit, short-term rentals are permitted in both. However, you cannot live in the accessory dwelling unit full-time and rent out the main house as a short-term rental full-time. Again, that's to protect the primary use of the property. The larger structure should be primarily used as a residential dwelling unit, not as a hotel. This wouldn't prohibit somebody residing in the main dwelling unit temporarily moving into the ADU while they rent out the main dwelling unit as a short-term rental. But it would prohibit somebody just living in an ADU and renting out the main unit as a short-term rental full-time. This also wouldn't prevent somebody renting to a party, both the primary and the accessory at the same time to the same party. So that's not what this is about. It's just making sure that the dominant use of the property is maintained as a residential use primarily. Simultaneous rentals are prohibited, so you can't rent to multiple parties at the same time. a party can have multiple individuals, but you just can't rent to two people or two groups that are unrelated to each other at the same time. So one STR occurring on the property at one time. You can't, again, turn this into something that it's not intended to be. So you can't offer catering or food preparation to your guests that are staying in your house as a short-term rental. They can prepare their own meals, they can order takeout. You just can't offer to cater them with food. That would be a much more intense use than short-term rentals. There's a maximum limit to guests, so no more than 2 guests per bedroom plus 2. So if you have a 3-bedroom home, you could rent it up to 8 people. So two guests per bedroom, so 3 bedrooms times 2, 6, plus an additional 2 people. That accommodates things like, pull-out couches and so forth. Parking, no additional parking than what is already provided on the site is required, is the proposal. That's because homes have parking on sites, and when short-term rentals typically are occurring, the resident is not there, so you have vacant parking available for the guests to use. Because we live in a very diverse and community that's developed over a long period of time, there are some properties that might not have legally established parking in the older parts of the community, and in those cases, they're limited to 2 off-street or on-street parking spaces. So again, we're trying to limit the impacts of this use, making sure that people park on-site, and if parking is not available on-site, they're limited to 2 cars that can park on the street. No exterior signage is allowed, and if an HOA or a neighborhood has more strict rules than what the city would adopt, this does not supersede those rules. So HOAs that currently prohibit them would be allowed to continue to prohibit them, or put in stricter standards than what the city might have in our zoning codes. The second aspect of this is, where are these going to be permitted? Because short-term rentals are being proposed to be accessory to single-family attached and detached dwelling units, we want to permit them in residential zone districts that allow single-family attached and detached by right. So that's the R1, R2, and R3 zone districts plus the agricultural zone district. So again, this is where the licensing regulations took a slightly different tact. We're going to propose updating those licensing regulations. Single-family attached is permitted by right in the R3 zone district. So by including an outright ban of short-term rentals in the R3 zone district, you're basically taking off potential properties that would otherwise be allowed to do it in other places in the community. But what you're ensuring is that it's still not allowed in multifamily developments. The licensing also was very silent on planned unit developments. So the LDC amendment would clarify that if a planned unit development allows single-family attached and detached by right, it would be permitted in that planned unit development, assuming they don't have HOA rules or covenants that prohibit it. And then there's one minor housekeeping cleanup in section 214020 that basically for accessory uses and structures, it says, right now it says no accessory structure on a residentially zoned property shall be used for any commercial purpose. So we're adding to that, other than a short-term rental located in a permitted accessory dwelling unit. So if we allow it now or in the future, and they legally establish an accessory dwelling unit, then it would be allowed. It wouldn't be run afoul of this particular provision of the code. So that's the overview of what we're proposing in the Land Development Code regulations. We are seeking a recommendation and input from Planning Commission tonight to pass along to City Council. This is currently scheduled for first reading on November 24th. We're trying to get these in place before the end of the year, so when the licensing regulations come into effect, we have zoning regulations to complement that. And we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to stand up the licensing, get information put together. So when January 1st comes along, people who want to apply for short-term rental have the information that they need to apply for this use. That's my presentation. I'm glad to answer any questions that the commission has.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Van Huzen.
Thank you. So currently, they are prohibited in the city, is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
But we've identified that they're occurring. This is.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's common knowledge. Have any of them been addressed with a cease and desist or given any type of?
Yeah, that's not to my knowledge. And I'm operating under institutional deficiency on knowledge here, but not to my knowledge. And I think primarily because city council indicated they wanted to solve this problem. And so we're taking a soft enforcement approach. Now, once these regulations go live, we are contracting with a service that helps us identify where these things are occurring throughout the city, and we will be sending letters informing them of the new regulations and their ability to apply for a license. It's right now without that, it's extremely hard to identify where these things are occurring. That map was generated as a courtesy from a vendor that we're looking at, that they end up and go scrape the sites, the VRBO and Airbnb sites, they scrape them for information, and that's how they compile that for municipalities to look for enforcement and licensing requirements. But they don't, Airbnb and VRBO don't give that information up freely, so we have to contract with these services that help us identify these things. Yeah.
And I suppose you can't just go ask every neighbor. No, that was good information. Thank you.
I just have two questions, actually. Where was the 500-foot derived from? I was just curious as where, that just seems kind of like an arbitrary number. Is it a block and a half? And I was just trying to do the math as what that would equate to.
Yeah, 500 feet is kind of like a mid-sized residential block. Again, if I'm making a not fully informed answer, but I think I think it was partially informed by potential other communities' regulations. But it's, again, like, I think it's to just provide some sort of separation. What I would recommend for council as well, because there's other ways to address this, it may not be an issue, is that we should see how it goes, and if we need to adjust the codes, we should come back and look for what's working and what's not working, and maybe this needs adjusting. Maybe that 500 feet needs adjusting.
Because the 500 feet was from the property line, so it'd be, say, a 500-foot hexagon or rectangular dimension.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, and I know you probably don't know the answer, what would that equate to the amount of potential units in the city?
Oh, yeah, I don't have that answer.
I was
Yeah.
curious. I was trying to figure it out, just looking at the square footage of the city related to
Yeah,
the
we would
zoning
have to, where's the zone districts that this would be permitted in, and then do that analysis.
Yeah, it'd be a big brain exercise.
From my experience in doing this in previous jobs, one of the things that we found out was, that map is a little misleading in essence. People go into this thinking, hey, I can earn a quick dollar. But a lot of those properties are never rented out because it takes a lot of effort to create something that somebody wants to rent. And a lot of these, they just post them, they don't get any action, and then they're like, I'm not gonna do this, and they disappear. So a lot of these properties never have renters in them, even though they might have been available at one point or the other during the course of the year. I think the amount that is actually gonna manifest itself is a lot smaller than what we're seeing on that map.
So just one other,
Yeah.
just devil's advocate question. Is there any language relative to someone coming in and poaching your license out from underneath you, that they know your license, like you'd be grandfathered in to a certain period of time? Like how does that work? As there's a duration of 1 year, like
Yeah,
my
so if-
neighbor has
yeah,
one for a year,
yeah.
and their time's coming up. What's that process?
Yeah, those are details that need to be worked out, but how that would likely happen is if you have a license, you're given the opportunity to renew that license before it expires. So if you renew that license before it expires, it's yours. It'll have to continue. If you let the license lapse and then your neighbor comes in and wants to pull a license, then you might be out of luck there. until they relinquish their license. So it's key upon the license holder to maintain that license.
Yeah, because I was just thinking that
yeah.
in terms of the 500 feet, that someone might not even be aware within the, it was just some of those
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, when it'll be interesting to see how this plays out on the initial issuance of the license, because it's going to be first come, first serve. And so if we get two and relatively close to each other, and they happen to be within that 500 feet, we're going to look at when was the complete application submitted, and they get the first preference. So there might be a little bit of a rat race at the initial part. If it turns out it's a big problem, we should probably look at changing that portion of the regulation. I think in a year we'll know a lot more about where these things are operating and how many there are, and that could help inform us on whether we need to tweak these things or not.
I think something else to keep in mind in regards to the licensing is, yes, it's created sort of this permit situation, but I think also where council's head was at and sort of the reason for coming at this at all is more of like a business license for sales tax and stuff. So
Yes.
probably didn't think it, obviously didn't think it through enough in the way that it's going to be used for land use purposes, but that's how they were imagining the license.
Right.
I think so.
And I think that's where my question is coming from, is to not dissuade people to not pursue it because it may be too
Onerous.
verbose for them. Like, it
Yeah.
might be some perceived issue.
Well, we can definitely, if you want to make that recommendation for council, as part of your recommendation, we can definitely pass that input along to city council.
Commissioner Van Huzen.
Comment regarding the licensing, actually. I would recommend that instead of someone being able to perpetually renew that license, that if someone else in that 500-foot would like to use it, I don't think the same person should hold it in perpetuity. If I didn't want short-term rentals in my neighborhood, if I got a license, I could sit on it, never rent anything out, and that actually defeats the purpose of having any short-term rental through that area. So-
Great, yeah, if there's
So my
concurrent.
suggestion would be, to not have them renewable unless someone else has not applied within that.
Yeah, if there's concurrence across planning commission, we can help you craft that feedback for city council.
Yeah, I would craft it that way, because like I said, if I decide I don't want them in my neighborhood and I license it and just renew every year, then there is no short-term rental in 500 feet of my home. But if it's 1 year, then I protect it for 1 year, and then you could actually have rentals because my neighbor next door wants to do it, and they should be allowed, I think.
All right, to get back on track, are there any more questions for staff? Yes.
What does enforcement look like for the city on this? Is it just like a code enforcement citation?
Yeah, moving forward, it would be a code enforcement issue.
And then would we try to contact the listing website and ask them to pull the listing?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, the enforcement action would be against the property owner or the license holder. And so if they continue to post it online, that's just further evidence that would be brought up in relation to that citation.
Okay, thank
I
you, Ms.
have not
Brassel.
been a part of any of those demos for that product. I don't think that you have been either, but I think it's more of just an informational resource and not going to be a part of our internal enforcement activities.
So then a follow-up question to the point that you ask, do the penalties need to be noted in the land development code?
Yeah, so we have enforcement requirements in the LDC, but there's also enforcement requirements in the licensing as well.
Understood.
So like the city could approach it either way. We probably would approach it through the
I
license.
was just thinking, just in our discussion here relative to what we're trying to do tonight,
Yeah,
if that wasn't included in a motion, if that's something that we would need to address.
we wouldn't need to do anything to the code
Okay.
to have that option because it already is in the code. It would be an infraction of the Land Development Code and any penalties that go along with that.
Understood.
I'm going to talk to the attorney. Like, I think there's typically a per day fine that can be levied,
Okay,
is on the table, yeah.
thank you.
If we had specific enforcement that you wanted to apply specifically to this, then we'd need to write that in there. But other than that, just the code enforcement and other enforcement options that are just available are still an option for this. We don't have to write that into this code for them to be available, if that makes sense.
It does. My question was, is if this would be an issue that would have to come back to us to revise the LDC, if it would become a cyclical.
No, not the enforesment provisions.
Yeah, I
no.
don't see the enforcement provision being an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, and even in the licensing regulations, there's stuff in there about other violations. Like, we won't issue a license to somebody with outstanding code violations. There's stuff in there about being current on taxes, I believe. So there's a lot more specificity and enforcement within the licensing code than there is within the LDC. But the LDC has the general violation options to it. So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks you for the information. That was more, it was a question related to this, but for general information as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Do any members of the public wish to provide comments on this case? And not noting anyone in attendance, I believe there is none. Is there anyone attending virtually tonight who wishes to speak?
No one registered to speak tonight.
Okay.
In Chair Biltoff, I just want to clarify, this is not a public hearing, sorry. Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, so we gave
Okay.
it, yeah. But,
Noted.
but that's fair. If anybody was available, I wasn't going to stop them.
Yeah, following the script, just, all right. Well, and actually, so then do we need to make a motion, as it's a public hearing, we're making a motion, isn't it asking city attorney as far as we're making a recommendation and this is a case before us?
Yeah, so there's potential motions in the staff report for you to reference. But yeah, you would make a motion and deliberate, or you can deliberate and then make a motion. Because it sounds like you might want to craft a couple of conditions maybe.
I believe that just in this discussion that we've had before, the motion, I think I'll ask the commissioners for a motion. We'll see where it goes during that deliberation.
Okay.
Can I have a motion on the case? Actually, before I do that, at this time, I'll close the public hearing for this case. I don't believe there's any additional discussion that needs to happen. Can I have a motion on this issue?
I move to recommend the city council approve ordinance 2648, an ordinance amending section 215263, comma 215400, comma 215420, and 2111200 of the Land Development Code pertaining to the regulation of short-term regulations.
Second that motion.
Is there any additional discussion that needs to happen? Seeing none, please open for electronic voting. The motion passes 5 yeses, 0 noes, 0 abstains. Is there any commission business to discuss at this time? As a reminder, we have a study session to follow this regular meeting in which we'll be discussing items we want to accomplish in 2025.
Chair, I'd like to just let all of you know for the study session, we are going to need to adjourn this, take a quick recess so we can move to another room because there's something else booked here at 7:30.
Noted. Thank you. Any other commission business? Seeing none. Is there any additional attorney business at this time?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any staff business to discuss at this time?
Just a couple of quick updates. City Council approved some items that have come in front of the commission. We wanted to give you those updates. On October 7th, on the second reading, they approved the comprehensive plan, and that went into effect on November 1st. Also on October 7th, they approved the JFW trucking rezoning and the Mile High Greyhound Park, which was the drive-through amendment, and also the Apple Green, which is on E470, the travel centers, both the north and south. 1 Buckley that was at 120th. That's continued to December 2nd. And on October 21st, they approved the Anderson Ranch annexation and zoning. And on November 4th, they approved the Second Creek plat.
Thank you. And I also want to commend staff on the meeting minutes that it was welcome to see the adjustments that you all had made from previous, that there were, I noticed in our discussions about actionable items, but that there was actually language in there of what we discussed. So I appreciate that.
Okay, did that hit the mark in terms of what you were looking for?
It did.
Okay.
Do any of the other commissioners have comments on that? About the meeting minutes, that if you've noted a change in how items, which we can talk about in our study session.
Yeah, we can talk about that in study session.
Yeah, I do have a comment about it, so if you want
Yeah,
to
we can
wait.
discuss that during the study
Okay,
session.
great.
Yeah, I would recommend we do that because the next
Yes.
thing is actually at 7:30.
The time is now 7:29, and the regular meeting is now adjourned. We'll take a brief recess and come back to the study session in the other room. It's been a long day.